Welcome to our first of the spring Book Sandwich Den series. Book Sandwich Den is a very long-running program under the auspices of the Friends of the Library. I assume many of you are friends of the library, and I am glad to welcome you. If you're not yet a friend of the library, we have applications over here. And for as little as $15 a year, you can become a friend of the library, receive in the mail, not just email, notices of some of our fabulous programs. And also, I think it's really important to know our 5-star rating that our library system has received, one of 2 in the state of Oklahoma, a very rigorous selection process. Part of the reason that the Tulsa Library System has attained that level is because of our Friends group. And so your participation and joining of the Friends will help us keep that highly sought after status. And before we get started, let me just wave my phone around and remind us all, since we're happily together in person, to silence your cell phone. And I do that as much for my own self. Calm Lake. What a great selection with which we can start. You can see there's a handout over here also that has the 6 programs for our Book Sandwich Den. The next 4 after this one today will all be here at Aronson at 12:10 on Mondays. And then our final program, which is backed by popular demand, is an evening program at Heirloom Rustic Ales, which is located near the Whittier Square area. It's on Admiral. You do not have to buy or drink alcohol to attend, but it's a great venue. We're trying to bring in some younger people. We'll be at 6 together, and the selection is definitely a timely one for a younger audience tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And if you have a video gamer in your life, though you like me may not be a video gamer, I promise you that book and that review will perhaps provide a bridge to the video gamer in your life. It certainly worked that way for my son.
Sorry, forgot. Next week, we're actually going to down one more level and ready.
Okay.
With great content. So all the way down.
Okay, and we'll have greeters to direct you to the right place if you are not familiar with Credington, but it's lower, one more down. I'm delighted to introduce to you our reviewer today, Jeannie Boudiette. Jeannie Boudiette. Jeannie is in her 24th year of teaching theater. She grew up in northern Michigan. She attended Interlochen Arts Academy in that part of the state, where she was a classical voice major. Kept that under wraps for me all these years. Jeannie went on to attend the University of Tulsa. She was a theater education major. She earned her minor in English and also musical theater. Jeannie has enjoyed teaching in Missouri, Indiana, and finally here in Oklahoma. As a former colleague of Jeannie's, I just can say that her students and fellow staff members have enjoyed her at least as much as she says that she's enjoyed them. She's a really special. Presently, she's a high school theater teacher in Jenks Public Schools. During her free time, of course, Jeannie is a reader. She also teaches workout classes. She does some driving for Uber, and she spends time with her 2 grown sons, Jack and James. Please welcome my friend and former colleague, Jeannie Boudiette.
Thank you, Lisa, so much for that introduction. It's so surreal that she reached out to me to do this, because I was like, I haven't talked to you in like over a decade. So it's kind of fun. There's so many fond memories of this library too. I would come here with my boys and we would take part in all of the activities that they would have. And they just were like, wow, this is a library. So, because we would go to the little ones. So thank you for this lovely opportunity. And I'm going to go back, and I have so many of our retired people from Broken Arrow that I'm like, you would enjoy this. So I think that, okay, we're going to keep talking. So anyway, I'm here to talk about Ann Patchett's novel, Tom Lake, which follows the life of Laura without the letter U. This novel touches on both romantic love, familial love, and platonic love. It begins in the 80s with Laura in her high school in New Hampshire, where the local community theater is holding auditions for Our Town. At the beginning of the day, Laura has no desire to audition, but she is simply there to help. As she sits there listening to audition after painful audition, she begins to understand Emily's character and definitely how not to play her, and decides to audition and gets the part. After the play closes, she moves on to college at the University of New Hampshire, not sure what she's going to do with her life. During her junior year, she auditions again for the play Our Town, and again gets the part and plays Emily, but this time is noticed by an LA director named Ripley, who asks her to take a screen test for a movie. She gets the part, makes the movie, but the actual movie is never released. She gets odd jobs here and there, acting in sitcoms and commercials. And then 3 years later, she gets an audition for Our Town in New York with Spalding Gray. And if you don't know, actually in the 80s, Spalding Gray was in a revival of Our Town. Unfortunately, the reality is they want someone as famous as Spalding Gray to play Emily because big names sell tickets. And so unfortunately, Laura doesn't get to play the part of Emily this time, but it is discovered that there is a summer town production of Our Town in Northern Michigan, who has recently lost the actress playing Emily. She had to do something else. And so here enters our Laura at Tom Lake. If readers are familiar with the play Our Town, they will quickly see how the play and the novel take on a lot of parallels. If you yourself have not read Our Town, I highly encourage you to read it and enjoy Patchett's interweaving of the greatest play ever written. Our Town is a play in 3 acts titled Daily Life, Love and Marriage, Death and Eternity. Following the lives of 2 families, the Webbs and the Gibbs, set in Grover's Corners, and it takes place during the years 1901 to 1903. Patchett's novel moves back and forth from Laura's time in the past to the spring of 2020, where Laura is a wife, a mom of 3 daughters, and a part-time dairy farmer. The girls are all roughly 2 years apart and presently are all in their 20s and have come back during the pandemic to help with the farm. During one of the evenings watching movies, the dad reveals that their mom used to be in a relationship with the famous movie star, Peter Duke, who's in the movie they are currently watching. The shock the 3 girls have at this realization spurs a plethora of questions from the girls, which leads the novel down a path retelling sweet moments of young love, heartache, and eventually eternal happiness. Perhaps the most interesting declaration her oldest daughter, Emily, who she was named, has made since she was 14 was that she is convinced that Peter Duke is her real father, to which Laura adamantly denies, and so becomes a question for the reader throughout the novel. As the novel unfolds, we see more parallels to the play. Emily, Laura's oldest daughter, is falling in love with Benny, who lives on the farm next door, similar to Emily and George in the play. Generations of Laura's husband's family is buried in the cemetery up the hill, just as the characters in Our Town are buried in the cemetery up the hill. Benny, like George, could have gone off to college, but decided to stay and help with the family farm. Flash back to Summerstock and Our Town, and Laura meets Peter Duke to play the part of Emily's father. It is important to note that Laura is not a wealthy girl. She is innocent. She has never been out of her hometown, was raised by her grandmother, who is a seamstress and teaches Laura how to sew. So for Laura to have the courage to leave for the summer knowing no one shows a great deal of courage, I think. Peter, on the other hand, who is 3 years older, definitely more worldly and, of course, dashingly handsome. The two strike up a love affair almost immediately. We meet Peter's older brother, Sebastian, a tennis instructor a couple towns over, and we discover that Peter suffers from a great deal of mental illness and copes with these struggles by abusing alcohol. I feel like there is some foreshadowing here with the older famous actor that is playing the part of the stage manager in the summer stock production of Our Town. Uncle Wallace, who has struggled with alcohol addiction and is frequently late, misses rehearsals, yet can stand up at a moment's notice and portray the most beautiful stage manager, an incredibly challenging role for any actor. I should also note here that when a play is in rehearsal, having been in a few myself and directed several, even if it's performed for a weekend or for a summer, there's always a super tight bond between cast members that I think this novel captures really well. As the summer progresses, we also meet Palace, a dancer in the cabaret, the musical choice for summer stock that year, and Emily's understudy for both plays. They're performing both Our Town and Fool for Love by Sam Shepard. Laura slowly begins to see flaws in Peter, his never wanting to be alone, thus the reason he is always in her room, and his brother's frequent visits. Her waking in the night to find him gone, only to discover him scribbling in his notebook about his character, his childhood, details of his school days, among other disturbing moments. As the novel progresses in the year 2020, we learn that Benny and Emily have become engaged and plan on taking care of the family's farm. Here, Patchett does a flashback to Tom Lake when the director of Our Town, Nelson, invites Laura to his family's farm. Of course, Duke, Sebastian, and Palace all have to go, and they all have an incredibly fun afternoon. In true summer stock fashion, once the play is on its feet and ready to perform for an audience, the director leaves. And so Emily is left trying to play two roles, Emily in Our Town and May in Fool for Love, two wildly different characters. Conflict continues to grow when Uncle Wallace winds up in the hospital after collapsing after a performance. Duke talked the director into using real tequila during the play Fool for Love, and Laura has an accident which leads to several pivotal shifts in the novel. Ripley, the director, from her first movie that was never released, makes a trip to Michigan and sees Duke in Fool for Love and winds up getting him an audition, and so launches Peter's famed acting career. After a few years in New York, Laura moves back home to New Hampshire with her grandmother. The years pass, Laura marries, has children, and lives a very happy life. But what happens between Laura and Peter Duke? Duke appears 2 more times in Laura's life after their time in Michigan. The first in New York before Laura marries is unexpected, but I suppose it needed to happen to address the notion that he is or is not her daughter Emily's father. The second is years later when Laura is married with children. I absolutely love the sweet ending to this novel and also enjoyed the author's note at the end to encourage the reader to turn back to Our Town. This concludes my general summary of the novel. There's a few facets of the novel I wanted to talk about. I love the relationship between Laura and her husband. Neither gave the impression they were settling. Their relationship, I thought, was very honest and faithful and grounded. Another facet that I had some of my AP Lit students read this. I don't teach AP Lit, but we read a lot of novels or a lot of plays in class, and I asked them to read this and give me their thoughts. And they felt like the idea of forgiveness showed up quite a bit. And I said, who wants forgiveness? I never really got the impression that anyone in the novel was seeking out forgiveness, but perhaps some were. And so we had some comments about how forgiveness is achieved, that it comes from understanding, not forgetting, that we have to address the past because it shapes our future. Perhaps even a possible theme in the novel is finding closure, which inherently involves forgiveness. As a theater teacher for 24 years, I have seen a half a dozen productions of Our Town. Every 4 years, my classes read Our Town, and I find myself early in life feeling the same way David Margulies writes in a 2003 foreword to the actual play, Our Town. So I don't know if David Margulies, the only thing that I remember him in, it's kind of sad, is he was the mayor in Ghostbusters, if you ever saw that movie. So that's kind of the visual I get. So this is a quote from him, and I just love it. You were compelled to read it like nasty medicine, force-fed for your own good, when you were too young to appreciate how enriching it might be. Or perhaps you saw one or two many amateur productions that, to put it kindly, failed to persuade you of the play's greatness. You sneered at the domestic activities of the citizenry of Grover's Corners, New Hampshire, and rolled your eyes at the quaint seeming romance between George Gibbs and Emily Webb. You dismissed Our Town as a corny relic of Americana and relegated Thornton Wilder to the kitsch bin along with Norman Rockwell and Frank Capra. In your mind, Wilder remains the eternal schoolmaster, preaching old-fashioned values to a modern public that knows far more than he does, and you remain steadfast in your skepticism of this importance of American literature. You are not alone. I have a confession to make, says David Margulies. I didn't always appreciate the achievement of Thornton Wilder. Like many of you, I have read Our Town when I was too young and had seen it a few times. I thought I knew it, and frankly, didn't think much of it. I didn't get what was so great about it. That is until I happened to see the 1988 Lincoln Center Theater production, an experience which remains one of his most memorable of my theater-going life. I was so mesmerized by its submersive power, so warmed by its wisdom, so shattered by its third act, that I couldn't believe it was the same play I thought I had known since childhood. When I went home and reread this masterpiece that had been on my shelf all along and pored over the text to see what the director and his troupe of actors, led by Spalding Gray, as the stage manager, had done differently, as far as I could tell, they had changed very little. I was the one who had changed. By the late 80s, I had entered my 30s and had foothold in life. I had buried both my parents, I had protested a devastating war, and I had fallen in love. In other words, I had lived enough of a life to finally understand what was so great about Our Town. End quote. I, like David Margulies, have changed too. I would venture to say we all have. Like Laura in the novel, she went through the struggles of raising children and having very little time for just she and her husband, difficult decisions she had to live with, choices she made along the way that impacted her life and shaped her future. But the beauty of the novel, of the character, is that because she played Emily, because she heard and spoke those Wilder words, she was able to appreciate, to step back and notice the beauty of hard work on a cherry orchard in Michigan, the awareness of what true love is, the serenity of being buried with a group of people who impacted your life enough one summer to name it your happy place. What I also think is beautiful about this play that the novel embraces is that we all have our story. And this play is 100% relatable to all of us. As Patchett so eloquently says on page 116, there is no explaining this simple truth about life. You will forget much of it. The painful things you were certain you'd never be able to let go, now you're not entirely sure when they happened, while the thrilling parts, the heart-stopping joys, splintered and scattered and became something else. Memories are then replaced by different joys and larger sorrows, and unbelievably, those things get knocked aside as well. Until one morning, you're picking cherries with your 3 grown daughters, and your husband goes by on a gator, and you are positive that this is all you've ever wanted in the world. End quote. In light of that, I wanted to share one of my memories. My hope after we are done here today is that you can think of that ever-present moment that you will never forget, be it 10 years ago, 10 months ago, 10 days ago. It is always there because it is beautiful, because it made an impact on your life, because it was a time when you truly felt like you were living and enjoying life. Because, and perhaps it is because you read this novel that inspired that memory to arise, or perhaps this novel reminded you to find the beauty in life. So as Lisa said, I was born and raised in Michigan and was fortunate enough to go to high school at Interlochen Arts Academy as a classical voice major. I made friends there with a girl who now, I don't talk too much anymore, but at one point we were inseparable. And like all friendships, and the rare times we do get to see each other, you pick up right where you left off. Amanda, having lived in Traverse City her whole life, showed me around northern Michigan when all I had really known was the southwestern part of Michigan. So I'm down here and she was up here. We had a lot of wonderful memories, but my greatest memory of all was in the springtime when the cherry blossoms were in bloom. We would climb into her family's 85 Oldsmobile station wagon, who they lovingly called Rosie. We would get our incredibly strong coffee at the Old Mission Coffee House and drive along the fence of the cherry orchard with our windows rolled down, smelling those delectable blossoms and singing Don't Go Breaking My Heart for all to hear, with the wind in our hair, and we did not care. In that moment, when I was 16 years old, I'm sure I thought, this is fun. But now as I think back to that moment, it was so beautiful, and I will never forget it. So many moments with my family growing up, with my boys and with my students. It challenged us to think about how we can continue to have that awareness of these moments. We all know how busy we get, always in a hurry, always trying to achieve the most in the least amount of time. I have found a lot of growth in this area by journaling at the end of the day. And I recently, this is very odd, I heard an interview with Dan Harris regarding his book, 10% Happier. In short, he discusses how he found that the art of meditation helped in his journey to being happier. That idea of training the mind to wake up and give awareness to all the thoughts, but carving out time in the day for intentional reflection. I think that is the word, intention, to challenge yourself to make that affirmation to be intentional. When I reread Our Town every 4 years with my class, or when I read this novel, that Michigan memory in the cherry orchard is one of the moments that always shows up for me. And while this is a beautiful memory, I truly love Patchett's quote, "The beauty and the suffering are equally true." It's so relatable to anyone's life, taking the good with the bad. You can't have one without the other. Yet it was so hard to watch Peter Duke suffer, but perhaps he didn't recognize that he was suffering. Those on the outside did, but like most coping mechanisms, those in the thick of it don't really have that awareness or choose not to. Yet even though Duke was flawed, like every man is, and even though he suffered, like every man does, he found the beauty. Thus bringing back to the original idea that both this impactful novel and this timeless play has, that we too can find the beauty if we only have the awareness to recognize it and embrace it. In conclusion, I was asked to give a little snippet of Emily from Our Town. My response is, I'm too old, because Emily died in childbirth at a young age. But I will give you a reading with feeling of her most famous monologue. This is the end of the play when Emily has died and she wants to go and see her family one more time. The others among the dead encourage her not to, but the stage manager indulges her. What Emily discovers during her visit is exactly what Laura begins to discover and understand as well. So here we go. I can't go on. It goes so fast. We don't even have time to look at one another. I didn't realize all that was going on, and we never noticed. Take me back up the hill to my grave. But first, Wait. One more look. Goodbye. Goodbye, world. Goodbye, Grover's Corners. Mama and Papa. Goodbye to clocks ticking and Mama's sunflowers. And food and coffee and new ironed dresses and hot baths. And sleeping and waking up. Oh, Earth. You are too wonderful to realize. Do any humans ever realize life while they're living it every minute? To which the stage manager replies with one of my favorite lines. No. The saints and poets maybe. They do some. Thank you for your time and happy reading. Yes, I open it up for questions or comments. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that struck me, being a parent of grown children,
Yeah.
is do we ever see our parents as actual people, or do we just see them as parents? And I enjoyed the three daughters began to see their mother as an actual person with past and all that.
I did
like
too.
that.
And my mom actually told me once, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie like Happy Gilmore and Adam Sandler. There was a guy she actually went to high school with, Dennis Dugan, who I guess produced all of those. And so when she told me that she went to high school with this producer, I was like, well, then I felt like I was in there. She was, well, what was he like? Did you know? What did you guys do? Did you guys ever do anything together? So I agree. I think it's really fun to see your parents for like that they were young ones.
And it makes you think, oh, I don't think I really knew my parents as people like the parents.
Yeah.
They were just my parents.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much more than that. Yeah. I think it was a very sweet relationship she had with her daughters. Mhm. Very sweet. Yeah.
One of the things that I loved right from the beginning was how all those terrible auditions informed Emily so that she could become the appropriate character. And I think that says kind of a lot about life. Sometimes we see things that are done so wrong, and that teaches us what not to do.
Well, and that's what my students said. They said, Miss Boudiette, I think that she didn't learn how to play her. She learned how not to play her. It's like, okay, good. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun having them read this and give me their feedback.
One more.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sorry, but I really love this book, and I love Ann Patchett, but it's just like that one decision she made that day as she was watching the audition. Kind of impacted the rest of her life.
Her whole life.
I don't think about that, how one decision negatively or positively impacted the rest of her life.
Yeah, and she definitely met some negatives along the way, but I think it really shaped her into, yeah, just having this awareness for life in a different way. And who knows, had she not been Emily, what would have happened? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, have any of you read Our Town or seen it? Okay, cool. So you kind of understood us. And they really did a nice one. I think it was even last year around this time here. Did any of you get to see Theater Tulsa? Yeah, and what was so interesting is they had some of the characters, genderless, not genderless, but they would have a woman playing George Webb falling in love with Emily, who was played by a woman. And I thought, okay, this is not going to work. But it went away. You had no idea that she was a girl and she was playing a boy. It just went away, which is kind of his intent, to have such little props and little set as you're paying attention to the story and not who's playing who. So, well, thank you so much for having me.